Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, which is entitled Top 3 Secrets for Optimizing and Automating the Pharmacy Buying Experience. My name is Kylie Savage, and I'm a part of the SpendMend marketing team, and I will be introducing our excellent expert speakers, Jake Thompson and Curtis McIntyre. We will be diving deeper into their intros in just a moment, but there are just a couple of housekeeping items I'd like to go over. So this webinar is a 60-minute presentation, which includes a 15 to 20-minute Q&A at the end. On your screen, there should be a spot on your GoToWebinar panel where you can go ahead and type out any questions that you have for our speakers to answer. We absolutely welcome and love answering your questions and comments, and we will try to cover as many as possible during the Q&A, depending on time. Any questions not covered on the Q&A will be answered and posted to the SpendMend LinkedIn next week. All right, and now we can get into the introduction of our speakers. To start at the top, we have Curtis. Curtis has a strong background in the pharmacy supply chain, data analytics, and software development. He managed the pharmacy supply chain for a large integrated health system for over 10 years before transitioning to a pharmacy consulting role. In 2017, he was awarded Innovator of the Year by ProcureCon for the development of the supply chain software. In 2018, he and a team of pharmacists founded Trula, a cloud-based pharmacy procurement software built for the pharmacy buyer. And Trula is now part of the SpendMend portfolio of solutions. Thank you so much for being here, Curtis.
Thanks, great to be here.
And then next we have Jake. Jake's an experienced pharmacy executive with an accountable and innovative track record, creating and implementing key strategies in clinical, operational, and business aspects of healthcare. As a past regional director responsible for 6 340B covered entities, he has a vast experience managing 340B programs from very large dish hospitals to critical access hospitals. While successfully passing 2 clean HRSA audits, he tripled the 340B value, resulting in greater than 100 million plus of 340B savings. Jake has extensive experience in optimizing the 340B program through day-to-day administration and compliance, program optimization tactics, and strategic growth tactics. He has held numerous national 340B leadership positions and has been a strong advocate for the 340B program. Thanks so much for being here, Jake.
It's a pleasure. Great to be with you, Curtis.
Yep.
With that being said, I'm going to hand it all over to Jake and Curtis.
Really excited to talk to you all today. As you can see, we got a quick poll here we'd like to jump off with, just so we know the audience, kind of know what's your role. We've put them in a couple buckets there. You can see, how many pharmacy buyers do we have versus maybe folks in a leadership position. Might even have some 340B team members or analysts. And if none of those 3 apply, maybe just hit us an other. And we've got 100 plus I see already, so we'll let that trickle in. Really excited, Curtis. We've known each other for almost 4 years now, and we finally are doing a webinar together. So really excited for today.
Yeah, it has been, it's been a long time coming, Jake.
And here we go, results coming in. All right, so we got 10% pharmacy buyer, about a third are some sort of in leadership management role, and then we've got some 340B analysts as well. One more poll, and we promise we won't pull you out. Let's see the next one pulling in here. When you think about pharmacy buying, obviously drug shortages comes up. But what's your next biggest challenge? Is it manual orders that aren't going through your traditional wholesaler route? Do you have central distribution and 340B, and therefore it's really complex and complicated on where orders and drugs should come from? Are you seeing just price changes that make it difficult knowing what to buy, or maybe just contract load issues? Or maybe it's other. So we want to hear from you here. Many of you I anticipate may select multiple because none of these act alone, and just because one's a problem doesn't mean the other won't be. But let's see where the top come in. Looks, pricing's not loaded correctly, right? So especially with a large 340B group on, it's certainly a hot topic today, and will continue to be, but equally almost, 20, 30% on those other ones. So good to know. We'll talk about some of these and hit some of the others as well. Here's what we're going to talk about today, right? Pharmacy buying. Is it really a problem? What are some secrets to improvements? You know, what are some of the best practices out there and what kind of results have they gotten? When you go to improve the pharmacy buying process, maybe what do you avoid doing, even though you think you're going to do well? And more importantly, how do we get out of this? How do we fix it? And how do we prevent the future problems that continue to hamstring pharmacy departments? Right, and as we talk about this topic, most of you on the phone or on the webinar here would say, yeah, it's really a problem, right? That we put as the 3 C's, the pharmacy procurement space. It's complex, tons of regulatory bodies that make the compliance difficult, and then constant change. And we've just identified 4 quick bullets under each one of those. And if we did a big poll, we'd probably add another dozen on top of this, right? You guys live this every single day. And it's probably, you know, seems simple because we've all lived it and been there and experienced this. But I make the point that we should bring this up in that when I talk with CFOs, they don't really understand how different it is buying in pharmacy and how many different NDCs that you're trying to coordinate and how big your inventory is and how big your inventory could be if you bought every NDC on the marketplace, and sort of the lack of intelligence around the buying process. So we all on here probably can appreciate the complexities, the compliance and change. You know, I think it starts with really internally, really advocating that, hey, the buying process for these high cost medications, often with pharmacy budgets $100 million up, is antiquated. And so, Curtis, I'll turn the mic over to you to get some numbers that folks might see to even highlight this.
Yeah. As a little bit of background, my background was first in supply chain before I even came into pharmacy. And when I came into pharmacy, and you know, this was kind of what I saw, and it clearly became clear to me that pharmacy is really one of the most complex categories of spend across any industry. And you know, us and you who've been in pharmacy, you know, we probably are just, you know, we're used to it, right? But as you compare it to other categories of spend, just the complexities in pharmacy and the size of it is just so much more difficult. If you look at the average health system by the numbers, we've done a lot of analytics on this. Super interesting. Average health system by the numbers, you're buying over 3,500 unique medications every year, over 9,000 NDCs from over 500 pharmacy manufacturers, but you're dealing with over 15,000 price changes on the medications that you buy. This isn't all Medicaid. This is just on the ones that you're buying, right? 15,000 different price changes every year. Not to mention drug shortages, it's expensive items. It's typically the largest category of non-labor spend within your hospital system. And then let's throw on the complexities of 340B, DEA, FDA, now DSTSA. And we have all of these complexities. And what do we typically do is we take a pharmacy technician in the pharmacy, we say, hey, you're responsible for all of this, and you know, like, good luck, you know, and we don't give them any software to really do their job. If you think about how the buyers are placing orders today, 90% of the orders are, you know, you're placing an order in the wholesaler system, and then you have this long tail of maybe 10% of your orders that are going to 503B pharmacies, they're going direct, they're going to specialty distributors, they're, you know, and you have this massive tail of orders that get called in, they get emailed in, you're jumping from website to website, and it's super inefficient. And if you go to the next slide, you could see, we call this the ordering spider web, but across the health system, you can have the same medication that's being ordered from multiple suppliers, different manufacturers, obviously different NDCs. You take a health system that has a lot of clinics, you have a lot of hospitals, maybe even you have a consolidated service center. And how do you drive standards across your health system? The first, you know, I've spent a lot of time in the pharmacy supply chain space, and a lot of time really, and probably many of you have, on really investing in, hey, let's reduce our inventory, let's optimize inventory, let's reduce expired medications, and which are obviously important things that we need to be doing. But as many of you can probably relate, it is a ton of effort to go get, save $150,000 on your inventory. What is really just interesting to me and really exciting from an opportunity standpoint for all of us is a lot of times you can capture $150,000 if you can just get the health system to align on the same NDC together. And it's just moving that NDC to a #1 position and getting everybody aligned. And so that's what we'll be kind of really talking about today is what can we do to really optimize the pharmacy purchasing experience.
Yeah, and I'll jump in, right? Just a couple of bullet points, right, that all of you experience or are aware of, but the preferred NDC that a health system wants to buy may not be readily available, right? You might see the average monthly usage stats, and so, hey, that's what I'm supposed to buy, but maybe not. Maybe it's changed since then, and those calculations haven't caught up. Maybe it's troublesome to know, okay, when am I buying what at the 503B facility versus a central warehouse, maybe buying direct. So it can be complicated on when do I enact that 10% that Curtis said, and then which vendor am I supposed to buy what through? Oftentimes it can be multiple 503B facilities. A lot of you talked about contract prices not being loaded, pricing errors hit the radar already. Orders to the non-wholesalers, how laborious it is. I mean, it's embarrassing to have a slide to suggest someone still puts a fax in place, but that happens. And then one of the struggles I had when I was back at Providence, we'd make what felt like a great decision, and then we'd go back to the computer and we'd email out to the system starting September 1st, do something different, right? And then you're relying on 100+ people remembering on September 1st to change a habit, and there was not a tool to be put in place. So what's happening today, right? I think we've hit the nail. What you already are aware of while you're on the webinar is yep, it's not exactly efficient. There's certainly ripe to have tools that need to help us with our buying. And it's one of the things Curtis and I and the teams are really passionate about. And so I want to flip that script, right? So let's change the webinar topics now to, okay, so now let's get the positive momentum behind us. We've sort of identified the problem. So we're going to hit just 3 secrets to optimizing the pharmacy buying. Curtis, I'll let you sort of jump in, and you hinted at it earlier.
Yeah, the #1 thing that I would suggest, if you're in a health system, that hospital system should have an NDC standards team. And we're talking 3 to 5 people, pharmacy team members, maybe representative from your buyers, contracting, operations, and that team meets every week. And really what they're doing is they're going through and saying, hey, for this medication, this is our preferred NDC, and let's drive that preferred NDC across the entire system. They're communicating the changes to the buyers. They're watching compliance, providing any updates. They'll actively monitor, that purchasing to those preferred NDCs and track the savings. This is one of the things that I think gets underdone, if that's the right word, is not tracking your savings. Like, track what you guys are doing, the work that you're doing, share it, celebrate it, right? Like, that helps just get momentum and gets people excited and going, wow, we saved, $40,000 this week just on the standard NDCs of getting all of our buyers, whether you have 10 buyers or 5 buyers or 30 buyers, but getting them all aligned for the certain medications that you've selected and that you're driving preferred NDCs to. You may already have a team in place, and if you do, awesome. Like, keep it up, figure out what you can do to optimize it. There was a health system that I worked with that one of my favorite clients that I've worked with, and what they did is, when they decided to tackle this problem, they decided to form this team. They met every Tuesday afternoon. They still meet every Tuesday afternoon, and Jake will get into some tools and different things, but we had analytics tools that says, hey, let's identify some savings for you. And we'll get to this in a case study, but it's pretty exciting just when you commit to having a team and commit to the effort, the amount of value you can drive for the organization. It's more than I think any of us would have expected or would realize.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that I get super passionate about because, right, labor shortage and having enough people to have time to commit to a committee can seem overwhelming, right? That's another time I'm stepping away to go do another project, another team. And the secret sauce outside of establishing that flow of communication and dedication, really, it's that commitment, is then how do you become efficient, right? And there are multiple tools out in the marketplace that can help identify some opportunities, which gets you somewhere, right? Because that's part of the problem, identifying where do I start? And then also looking for how do I get tools to help me efficiently then execute on those? Because that can be 90% of the way is after identifying the opportunity. And so I think if all of you reflected on, hey, the ideal tool to help me make decisions for my health system on when to buy what and where, you'd probably come up with some other lists, but we threw just some out there, right? The ideal tool would have synchronizing pricing with your wholesaler, right? In real time. So when you're in a meeting, you know exactly what it is. And there's a dashboard that tells you what that price is, not what it was last week, because as Curtis said, it changes a lot. So if you met prior to the quarter and did your work and met after the quarter, probably a different price. How do you group similar medications to look for efficiencies, right? Which NDC should I start and how do I standardize to those and give me the first one to work on? Making sure it accounts for the various account types and class of trade. You know, how do then I see the variances across my accounts that I have that could be 100 or 1,000 plus across the health system? And then how do I monitor that the decision that we made that was correct last quarter, it's still in this quarter is the correct? Because with all the changes in drugs coming in, branded, biosimilars, generic, price changes, right? What was a great decision 6 months ago may or may not still be true. So how do we monitor for that? And then as Curtis said, how do we track so we can celebrate and see that it's worth all our time? So probably some more ideal tools that each of you would have if you sat down with a piece of paper. But that's really that tip is how do you get the tool that has the most of these sort of ideal states to help you be efficient. So that way, when you meet on Tuesday afternoons, you're covering the most ground as possible. The third one that we think is really important, and we hear about this with our clients, right? From wholesalers, GPOs, TPAs, right? It's quick to get into what they all don't do well, right? The negatives, the wish I haves, which is okay in the right time. But what's really important is that those are key partners, right? And we're going to specifically talk about wholesalers. At the end of the day, the organization's committed to most likely one of the big three. And that's who you're with through the contracting period, at least. And so that decision's been made. And so I encourage everyone to take the best advantage of that. You got to find the right person in the organization to create a relationship with. So that way, when the team needs help from a wholesaler, there's a venue, there's an open communication to then get that help. Because oftentimes you're going to want to have conversation with the wholesaler outside of those Tuesday meetings. You can see we put those into the 3 buckets there, right? How do we make sure that we see that the stock levels continue if we're going to shift drug to a specific NDC? Or maybe the ideal NDC is not currently at the distribution center, but maybe we want it to be, right? That's not an easy lift, and you can't do that in the dark, right? We know, and the wholesalers will admit, they have contract load and pricing issues. It is complex for them as well. And so they accept the responsibility for those, but how do we make sure that those are moving along and that they're monitored and taken advantage of so you can fix those problems that have happened because of the pricing load errors? And then drug shortages, right? Many of you need to be able to talk to them about and what's the stock and how do I get my right allocation, et cetera, or get ahead of it. Just a couple things, but the key message here is that there's got to be a constant flow of communication and a good positive relationship with your wholesaler. We recommend that you get on the calendar with whomever your rep is once a month to build that and take advantage of that time.
Yeah, just to give an example here, there was a client that that I worked with, and they had an effort on price variances, and we had a tool for them that identified about 3 million in annual variances that they were just, could have been paying a better price, but the contracts weren't loaded correctly across all their accounts. And so they took that report and they just started, they worked with the, worked from the top and kind of worked down the list. And they met with their wholesaler, and they still do. They meet with their wholesaler every month. And on the agenda of that wholesaler is they're like, okay, which variances are we tackling this month? And there's accountability, and there's follow-up, and there's making sure that those are getting resolved and the credits and rebills get due to you. Before tools, and many of you may be in this situation. I know when I was at Intermountain Healthcare and we were dealing with variances, like you only knew of a variance if you just happened to come across it, right? Like I wished I had a tool that could say, hey, just show me where my biggest variances are that are impacting, our spend, and let's get them corrected, and let's start with the top and work our way down. And so, this health system, they just did an awesome job, and they just tackled that 3 million, and they got it down to about 300,000. I mean, just working on the top 20 and getting those resolved. And as you know, there's new variances that pop up like every month, right? It's just, there's new ones, and they just stay on top of them and get them corrected before they become, a long-term problem.
Well, Curtis, you hinted at earlier. Let's shift into a couple case studies where people have utilized some of these tactics and some of the results.
Yeah, I kind of jumped the gun. So on the last one, so first case study, Memorial Sloan Kettering out of Manhattan. So large integrated health system. They have multiple hospitals and clinics. Their drug spend is approximately $1 billion a year. And they had a goal to find and capture 25 million in pharmacy cost savings over 3 years. And so they were looking at different ways. How do we tackle this? The first thing that they said is we need a tool. We need a tool to identify where do we go find the money? Like we have a savings target. Like I know there's savings there, but how do we make sure we're working on the biggest ones and the ones that are gonna have the biggest bang for our buck? So they implemented actually analytics tool that I was a part of, and that tool identified 54 million in standardization opportunities to standardize specific NDCs across their health system. They formed their NDC standards team. That NDC standards team met weekly. And as I mentioned before, they still meet every week, and they're just going through their preferred NDCs and setting standards. And they also meet with their wholesaler once a month to address any stocking needs and price variances. And in the first 12 months of this team being formed, they had captured over 30 million in realized savings. And it was just setting preferred NDCs and driving their buyers to those preferred NDCs. And so, this was really an experience for me where I just saw how well, if you structure it well and your team, the right individuals are involved, you're using the right tools, the amount of savings that you can actually capture and really go after. The second case study, Banner Health, we work with them really closely on the Trula side, large integrated health system, approximately 500 million in acute care annual drug spend. They implemented our pharmacy ordering software to drive preferred NDCs across their system. So think of a software that, the buyer doesn't necessarily have to think about, well, which supplier do I buy this medication from, or which NDC am I supposed to buy? They just have a shopping cart, build the shopping cart of the medications they need, and the software will automatically route the order to the health system's preferred NDC and preferred supplier for that medication, so that they can ensure that they're capturing savings with every purchase that they make. So what happens in that process is their pharmacy leaders set preferences and thresholds in the software that guide the algorithms to direct the buyers to the optimal NDC. And the sites that are placing their orders through the software are saving an average of 3.85% of their annual drug spend when they are purchasing their medications through the software compared to before they implemented use of it. Then the nice thing in this scenario was it's very much let the algorithms do the work, because price changes are happening all the time. It's very difficult to manually go, okay, we need to switch this NDC or this NDC, and how do we account for even the 340B mix and the 340B pricing and accumulations? and having software to kind of take all that into consideration as it makes decisions about what the optimal NDC is for that health system. And you know, buyers already have a tough enough task, and to tell, you know, to have to say, hey, for these 3,500 medications, here's the NDC you need to remember, and those are changing all the time, you know, is really difficult. But if you have software that just handles that part for them, it saves the buyers a lot of headache.
And so next, let's talk about, okay, hey, there's some of the positive things when you go to do it. You know, there are some learnings, right? Like, hey, when we go to, this is a complex process, we touch it and we start to make some changes. How do we make sure that we do no harm, right? How do we make sure that we completely better the process and don't put any wrinkles? So we've got a few tidbits that we want to talk about here. The first one, and it's hard right now with the way that, you know, the workforces are in health systems and the pressures they're under, right? It seems hard. How do I set up a committee and get a commitment from everybody and find time on the calendar, and then what do I need to do? And if that seems to be too much, right, then take it on yourself. If you're the buyer, then making sure, okay, I'm gonna dedicate just 30 minutes this week to figuring out, am I really buying the right drug? Because I'm seeing it and I see there's options and I buy a lot of it. How do I do that? How do I just start to make it and take a step one by one, even if you can't get that full committee together yet, to just get some momentum, right? Because at the end of the day, these things are happening, and manufacturers aren't going to let you go back, you know, for the past 24 months when we come around to getting on top of this. And as we've said, there is a lot of money at stake. So don't be afraid to get out there and work on these, even if it's just one a month by yourself, right? Ideally, get a group together and stress the urgencies from this.
Jake, on that, just if you go back on the indecision side, one of the things I've worked with different clients, and maybe they've set up an NDC standards team, but they over analyze it, right? They're just like, well, but what about, well, and they just never make a decision on a preferred NDC. Like, I'll be in an hour meeting and there's no decision made in that entire hour. And it's like, look, you can analyze these things to death, and but what you can't do, and you see that that's underlined, you can't go back in time and capture any missed savings due to indecision, right? Like, go ahead and make it, you know, make a decision, say, hey, this is the preferred NDC we're going to drive to. But if the price changes, or if all of a sudden there's starting to have supply issues, all right, let's go back and you can pivot. But what you can't do is go back in time. And I think that's one of the things as you think about your NDC standards team, don't get stuck in one of those situations where, you know, yes, you have to do your due diligence, you have to analyze it, but don't overanalyze it to the point that you don't make a decision on a preferred NDC.
Great point. You know, and augment that, right? Get a tool, because there is dark data in the pharmacy procurement process. And you need to take a tool to be able to make sure that the information that you're analyzing and making decision on is current and real and comprehensive. And so, right, you can't optimize what you can't see. And the worst thing is to spend a lot of time and then you don't realize the savings, and then you lose momentum and energy behind the process, right? So want to get a tool to help guide that process.
The third would be just communication, particularly if you're not using like a ordering software that's automatically kind of driving those decisions and helping for the buyers. If you're just, say, using an analytics tool and then you're making preferred NDC decisions, well, if you don't communicate those decisions to those who are actually buying, then no decision was made then, right? Like, it's a failed decision. So in these cases, you know, you make a preferred NDC decision, have a good communication strategy that your buyers understand what is the preferred NDC for this medication, and so that they can start, you know, executing on it, and also give them tools to be able to track, you know, their compliance to those. Buyers are interested in doing the right thing. I've never met a pharmacy buyer who doesn't want to do the right thing. It's just they have so much in front of them and so much coming at them all the time. So give them nice tools to be able to track what they're doing and be able to see what the preferred is, so that they can make the right decision. And this goes kind of that same thing as no tracking. If you're going to do this, track your compliance to the preferred NDC, track the savings that you've realized. You could even track the savings that you've missed if you're not buying the preferred NDC. If you're not doing that, it's really hard to continue to justify your effort. Like, why are we meeting every week? Why are we doing this? Why? But if you're tracking it and you can see that savings just growing every week, it is an incredible motivator for the buyers, for the pharmacy, the NDC standards team. As they see that, they're just like, let's keep going. Like, let's see how big we can get this number. And it's fun and celebrate it, right? Like, do things to celebrate, you know, as you're seeing that savings grow and you're driving value for the health system. One thing that we talk about, before I jump on this, one thing that we talk about is if you look at your hospital system, and many hospital systems financially are dealing with a lot, right? Like, you have reimbursement and you have rising costs and you have all these things, and some health systems, you know, are struggling even making a profit. And if you can go, well, if we can save, you know, let's say we could save $20 million out of our pharmacy costs, like actual reduction in 20 million in pharmacy costs. I mean, that's $20 million that goes straight to the bottom line for the health system. This is huge, right? And your ability to have a really strong impact for your health system. And then the last one that we'd speak to is really no prioritization. Jake says as well as don't assume the loudest noise is your priority. Try not to say, you know, it's easy to go like the squeaky wheel gets the grease. In this case, it's use good tools to prioritize your work. Let's take price variances, for example. Let's say you have a price variance, you're like, oh, you know, we got to get this price variance resolved. You know, it's impacting us. It's going to $7,000 over a year time period. It's going to impact us. Meanwhile, you have a price variance that could be impacting the health system $300,000 a year, right? So just because something's noisy doesn't necessarily should make it your priority. Is use tools to prioritize your work and prioritize it by the things that are going to have the biggest impact on the entire health system.
It's not a day goes by that I don't hammer this out. I mean, on the call earlier this morning, it was the same thing. What's the financial upside versus the risk on this decision? And oftentimes it's hard to get that number initially, right? Because it's everyone assumes that it's going to be a large number because it's being talked about. And so it's super important to understand exactly what is the dollar opportunity here versus others. And so that way we know where to focus because there's only so much time in the day. So that rounds out our top 5 pitfalls to avoid. You know, let's move into, this sounds great. We've known all this. Now, where's this unicorn that fixes all this, right? And that's where the Trula team has been dedicated to fixing this problem for years now. And there is a tool out there that has those ideal aspects to where, as a buyer, you order from one portal, no matter what drug, what it needs to be, the analytics behind it, the intelligence behind it, routes that to the right supplier and the right NDC. Trula eliminates the ability or the need to buy at the NDC level. You obviously order from Trula on the NDC level, but when you order acetaminophen or pick your high-cost drug, the software helps drive which NDC should we be buying, where should that NDC be ordered from, and it's built in the logic back. And that is why we built Trula, right? Trula was built to make pharmacy ordering easier. That was the first piece. And what we realized, as you make it easier and smarter process, the savings gets right behind it, right? And we're fortunate in that there's so much money in the drug spend, right? If you have $1 billion drug spend, it doesn't take a whole lot of percent improvement to make a really big impact on a financial number because it's so complex and there's just so much spend happening. So a small percentage can make a really big impact. So Trula is built. How do we make it easier? How do we save money? Trula is really 2 software packages. right? So actionable analytics, some of the things we've talked about. How do we know where to start? What's our price variances? What's the NDC opportunities? What happens when the price changes? What if we anticipate the price changing? What will that look like? How do we then make sure we're on the right NDC, stay ahead of the game on some of that? That analytics is all in there and coordinates very well on the procurement side. How do we then, that tail of opportunities, how do we make sure that they get enforced? We see them, we decide, yep, that's the NDC. How do we stop emailing to say, hey, please remember to do this? How do we put that into a tool? And so these two aspects are the core functionality within Trula. And as a reminder, Trula is part of the SpendMend Pharmacy team that have all health system, healthcare leaders came from pharmacy, been on the front end of this, experts in the procurement process from 340B all the way up to optimizing your spend. And we're super excited to continue to, put the word out on this awesome tool that's been tried and true now in the marketplace that really can help make the improvements on that. So Curtis, before we turn it over for questions, you've been dedicating the last 5 years to this. Maybe I don't know if you have any closing comments on what we talked about today.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I would say, my entire career really has been on this. I came into pharmacy and it was looking at it and going, okay, you have something that's so massive, it's so complex, there's so many moving parts and things changing all of the time, new NDCs, new prices. And I was like, we need tools. Like, we have not had tools to really optimize things. And, I started in the space just building my own, back in the day, we didn't have amazing, like, some of the technology that we have, right? And I was, had these automated, like, PDF reports that would email out to our buyers and directors every month, and that would show, like, hey, here's your saving. And it was a ton of work. And now I look at it and I look at what we're able to do and the data that we're able to pull things together. And I just think about, man, if I had this when, I was managing at Intermountain Healthcare, I mean, that would have just really been a dream. And that's really what we built it for. People ask me sometimes, they're like, you just kind of, what's the big driver for you in this and everything? And honestly, like, I get out of bed in the morning and I like to look at how much did our clients save today or, yesterday. And these reports just updating every day of the value that we're able to start driving that, beforehand, before we had tools like Trula, are just very, very manual and super tough to just kind of do on your own because it is so complex. So it's an exciting time. I think pharmacy purchasing, you're seeing a lot that's going to continue to happen, I think, over the next 3 to 5 years of where the industry is going to be better buyers, right? And one last, I guess, comment for the pharmacy buyers that are on here, like, your job, I think, is one of the hardest jobs that is in the pharmacy space. When you think about everything that's on your responsibility and really not having any tools, and this is why we built Trula, is what can we build for the pharmacy buyer that is really built to help them just really continue to just do great at their job. And so that's why we built it.
Well, our goal was to get through in 40 minutes, so we had plenty of time to do any Q&A out there. And then always a pleasure if we can give 5 minutes back, because we know a lot of this virtual world nowadays is everyone's expected to turn into the next meeting at the top of the hour. So Kylie, maybe I'll turn it over to you for what questions have come in, and we'll invite more.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, Jake and Curtis, for the information that you've shared. I'm going to go through the questions in order. However, please, everyone, continue to ask questions at the GoToWebinar panel. If we don't get your questions during this presentation, they will be posted on LinkedIn next week. We are getting some questions about the webinar and the slides material being available. There will be a follow-up email tomorrow. Just keep a lookout for that. That will have a link to the webinar and the slides that will be downloadable. All right, so let's jump into this Q&A. First question we have, what is the best way to identify price variances, and what would the name of the report look like?
Well, on our side, we call it the price variances report. so from a naming standpoint, when you look at price variances, any health system is going to have thousands. I'm just saying it. You're going to have thousands of price variances. Many of them are not worth your time or anybody's time. It's like, oh, this impacts our budget $100 a year. Like, not worth your time to try and pursue those when there's so many. And so what we do is we group like accounts. So let's take like GPO dish accounts. So all your GPO dish accounts get grouped together, and we look and we say, what is the pricing loaded across those accounts? And is there any variance? Is everybody paying $100 for this specific NDC? Oh, well, why is this health system, they have a contract loaded at 75? And so then we take that difference and we can look at, you know, what your purchases, your annual purchases are for that NDC across each of those accounts, and we can extrapolate and say, well, here's the impact. If everybody could get that $75 price, there's $115,000 in savings on this one NDC. And so, and you use that really honestly, like you put it right in front of your wholesaler and say, look at this, look at the price variance. This health system's got a different contract loaded at 75. Sometimes it's the wholesaler's fault, sometimes it's the GPO, sometimes it's the manufacturer, but get it resolved, get the 75 loaded for everybody, and, you know, get your credits and rebills, and now you know, there was 115 grand just on that one NDC.
I'll chime in, Curtis. One of the things I hear a lot of is, well, I just expect my wholesaler to get it right, or my GPO tracks that for me, right? And each of them do a little bit in the space. But the reality is that most health systems don't have a wholesaler connected person who knows every account where all drugs are bought and what the actual true class of trade is in their system versus what it should be. So part of the critical piece is making sure you're capturing all the accounts and they're in the right bucket in the health, or you know, at the wholesaler level. You know, we've also talked about the non-wholesaler drugs. They certainly wouldn't be touching that. And from a GPO perspective, there are tools. All the major GPOs have tools looking at what's being bought on contract, et cetera. But a large percentage of drugs don't go on a GPO contract, almost half of them. You know, when you look at 340B accounts, you look at WAC accounts, you look at the 10 to 20% that's bought outside the wholesaler even, oftentimes those aren't on it. So some tools that are available through a wholesaler or GPO might get a small slice of this, but not a comprehensive, because they're not responsible and they're only can look at what they have spend going through. So that's really why you want a tool that is overarching no matter who it is. And we're vendor agnostic. We work with all the wholesalers and all the TPAs and all of the GPOs to help make sure that the right price is getting bought and everyone's happy in that space.
Thank you. All right, next question. Any tips for an effective way to standardize across the system when 340B and non-340B locations are involved? We have a standard for 340B and a standard for non-340B, but we'd really love to see a standard across the system.
Yeah, I'll take the first stab at this, Jake, and feel free to chime in. This is a, you know, not an easy one for anybody, right? When you have that mix, and most health systems do, you'll have a mix of 340B sites and non-340B sites. We've done a lot of analysis on this. We like to look at everything from a weighted each price. So it's taken into account your 340B price, your GPO, your WAC, and your mix. And you look at it at the system level. And you go and say, okay, what is that weighted price? Okay, what would be the preferred NDC? What's interesting is many times that matches with, so what would be said as the preferred also many times does match with what's going to be on your non-340B facilities would have been their preferred anyway. So that's great. But there are those situations that you're calling out, right, where, you know, my non-340B sites are going to need a different NDC standard because the price is that significantly different. My weighted mix price for my, you know, for my 340B covered entities is this NDC, but for my non-340B entities, you know, it's going to be a different NDC because it's like a $20 per vial difference. So that's significant enough that you will want to keep, you know, kind of that two standards. But my recommendation would be, whenever possible, try to drive to one, and then have, you know, a process to manage the exceptions where you do need to have kind of a secondary standard for your non-340B sites.
Yeah, and Curtis, I don't know, you might have a stat on this, but the majority of the opportunity in standardizing NDCs is not your high cost infusion drugs that are oftentimes in the 340B space, right? A lot of these NDC opportunities are acute care, and thus you know that 340B mix matters, but it's not nearly as, it's not weighted as heavy in the 340B space. So just because you have 4 out of your 20 hospitals that aren't 340B, you certainly should continue to take that dive each NDC to make sure actually we can standardize it across all 20, because it's a GPO heavy purchasing agent.
Yeah, and if it's like pennies difference, don't have 2 standards, right? Just drive to one. Like maybe your non-340B sites are going to pay 5 cents more. That's fine, right? Pay 5 cents more to drive standards. And because there's a lot of just downstream impacts to driving standards as a health system. I used to contract, was responsible for all the contracting with manufacturers. And as you guys know, if you do any contracting with them, they might come and put a price across from you and say, hey, will you guys buy our propofol or something like that? And they know that you don't, it's very difficult for you to drive compliance across your entire health system. And their price reflects that, like it does. But if they knew that you've proven that you can get all of your, how many hospitals aligned to your NDC, and maybe it is just a drag of a button, and I could just drag that NDC to the #1 position, that increases your negotiation leverage with the manufacturer significantly. Or if there's, if there's any GPOs on this webinar, I mean, same thing, right? If you can use tools to drive that compliance to your contracts, those manufacturers are willing to give either better pricing because they know that you have the ability to do it.
All right, thank you guys. Next question. When you're analyzing the preferred NDCs, is it better to only look at the purchase history, or should you consider the point mix and how it's splitting?
Yeah, so the mix becomes important, and that's why whenever I'm looking at anything, I'm always looking at the mix. I'm looking at the weighted price. I've seen this way too often where, and if you're asking this question, you probably have too, is if you say, hey, I'm gonna, this is the best GPO price, this is the one I'm gonna buy, and not thinking about your mix, actually would have been a completely different NDC by a long ways because you have a really high 340B percentage, or vice versa, the other way around. And so whenever you're looking at anything, take your mix into account.
And I think, Curtis, I'll chime in on, right, one of the cool things when we put out this feature, whenever you can predict or put in price changes that you might anticipate, because maybe I think the question might be hinting at how do I prospectively make sure that if I make the change today, tomorrow it's still there. And our tool that allows you to see what happens if the manufacturer goes up 5%, because they have on a quarter for the last 4 quarters, then you could see, okay, wait, I can anticipate what this mix might look like, and it's still the same NDC. So it's I think that's another aspect of the question is, as you look at that historical perspective, it certainly knows where to start, but understanding, hey, if it's a 5% variance and we're up against a quarter and we predict a change, hey, we might want to actually hold tight and see what that does, or predict it out to see where it goes.
A good point.
All right, next question. How does the tools evaluate costs related to potential rebate tiers?
Yeah, rebates are always fun, and so one of the things that the tool does in the algorithm is you can for a specific NDC, you can have a rebate consideration thrown into it. So you could say, hey, on this medication, it qualifies for a 5% rebate, and so the algorithm is taking that into its consideration. Where it gets a little bit tricky is when you talk about tiers. Let's take GlaxoSmithKline, for example, and vaccines. You know, I know traditionally, a lot of times they'll do rebates, and if you hit certain tiers, you know, they might give some rebates back to you. And so tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and it all, you know, gives you a different rebate. That obviously gets a lot, you know, a lot more complicated. And in those situations, we recommend kind of either accounting, like projecting, okay, if we drive our compliance, what tier will we be at? Okay, let's build that into the algorithm to say, you know, we're going to get we anticipate if we drive all our compliance here, we'll get a 10% rebate. So let's have that, you know, considered when it's determining the preferred NDC.
And then in that case, you just override, right? You override the logic and you put GlaxoSmithKline at number 1 and you drive the compliance. And it's better than current state where the buyer sees the wrong price in the wholesale catalog. And it doesn't matter because now we know that it's there and we drive it on the back end.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Jake. Yeah, just override that thing and put GSK at the number 1 position. And now that's what everybody will buy.
All right. Next question. Does Trula address failure to supply clauses in contracts?
Yeah, so we actually were on a client call last week on this exact topic, because one of the things that's really cool is, like, for you McKesson clients out there, is Trula has a live integration with your distribution center, your McKesson distribution center, for inventory levels. So let's say your preferred NDC, Trula can see it's not in stock, so it's going to go to number 2. And because we have that information, and we could see, hey, it wasn't in stock, so we had to go to number 2. Well, instead of having to, you know, traditionally when you have a failure to supply and you want to provide your proof, you have to show that you tried to place an order in the number 1 or on that NDC. It wasn't available, so you had to buy a different NDC. It's a very manual process. It's super annoying. But if you, with Trula, because the system automatically knew and it had to go to number 2, and we provide that in a report that says, hey, you know, we tried to buy this NDC on these dates. We can show here it came through as 0 stock at McKesson, so we had to buy this NDC instead, and we paid this. And so here's the difference that you owe us, and have that automated. Doesn't exist today, but definitely something that we are targeting in the near future, because we think it's a huge opportunity. And if we can get, you know, provide enough of the information that the manufacturers would, you know, say, yep, this would give us what we need, I think it would save a lot of effort for everybody.
I wish I had that 10 years ago in New York, Curtis, because, you know, a lot of arguing goes on what that stat is, and having proof is clutch.
Yeah.
All right, next question. Evaluating best price for 340B hospitals that manage split inventories may not have the same preference item. How would this be managed?
You start with that one, Jake?
Well, can you say that again, Kylie? I'm trying to make sure I understand that question.
Yeah, of course. Evaluating best price for 340B hospitals that manage split inventories may not have the same preference item. How would this be managed?
Yeah, well, the 340B price should be consistent across the organization, and thus the weighted price mix should be the same. So I'm not sure I understand that there's really an impact. Curtis, your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know if the question is inferring, you know, kind of back to what we were in the other one, if the health system also had some non-340B facilities. And so you're not going to have the same essentially preferred NDC potentially. So I don't know if that was the case.
But if you're still on, type in the question, maybe help us clarify so we can answer that correctly.
Yeah, it said yes. Curtis answered with the weighted mix.
Okay.
Cool.
Next question. How are the wholesalers controlling for demand, signaling, and inventory stocking to align with the high volume MDC standardization decision made in Trula?
That's where that coordination with the wholesaler becomes important, because let's say your NDC standards team says, hey, for this medication, we're going to go to this NDC, but you don't tell your wholesaler. I mean, you might be switching a ton of volume from one NDC to another, and all of a sudden the wholesaler's like, what's happening? And we're out of stock. Like they're not prepared for it. So your NDC standards team has to coordinate with your wholesaler and say, okay, if we're going to be moving this volume, there needs to be some coordination there to say, hey, on September 1, we're going to be starting to buy, we're going to transition from these NDCs to this one NDC for this medication. Can you adjust your inventory levels appropriately? That's super important, because if you don't, you're in trouble because they may have some stock a little bit, but maybe not enough to support all the demand that you're going to ship that way. Did I answer that question? I don't know, Jake.
Yep.
All right, great. Next question. Do you recommend this structure report through pharmacy to have PharmD oversight? Almost all pieces currently report through pharmacy except contracting. Would you say it should all tie together for the best chances at success?
I mean, I'll hit that. I mean, it's all about having the right people, right? And having someone who has experience, and where they report, I don't think it matters, right? The health systems are oftentimes, all the pharmacy leaders don't even report to the same pharmacy head at the system level. And you sort of are constantly in a matrix organization. So to me, the key is like, hey, this is a priority, and we're going to get the right resources, which, maybe it's IT's involved as well. And so I think, from an ideal, standardize all the pharmacy reports up, sure. But I don't actually think that's important. But Curtis, you've seen lots of teams too. Maybe you have a different take.
No, I agree. I don't think it necessarily should matter. I recognize in some health systems it can matter. It gets a little bit tricky. What you have to do though is everybody's just got to be working for the same common goal. There can't be egos. You've just got to go after it. That Memorial Sloan Kettering, case study I showed. I mean, it was supply chain and pharmacy working hand in hand. I mean, they were lock in step, working together towards that together. And it wasn't like supply chain coming in to try and take over something for pharmacy. And it wasn't pharmacy trying to give the Heisman to supply chain. It was them working together and saying, hey, we have a $25 million goal. Let's help each other and let's go get it. So that's where, I know in some organizations it does get a little bit tricky because, that type of thing, but figure out a way to where, if you are in different reporting structures or whatever, kind of take down those walls and figure out how to work together for the same common goal.
Great. All right, I'm going to do one more question and then we'll wrap it up. Can Trula work with my existing hardware, such as medication carousels or automated dispensing cabinets?
Yes, yeah, we set Trula up to essentially integrate with any of the inventory vendors, so they can push orders to Trula, or Trula can have essentially inventory visibility on those, so you can automatically build an order based on min and max levels that are in your carousels or other devices. So we have clients today who, BD carousels, for example, that push orders into Trula, and so the buyer doesn't have to manually go and build that shopping cart. The shopping cart gets built for them, and then they click prepare order, and then the software automatically routes it to where it needs to go.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Jake and Curtis, so much for answering all these questions. Do the two of you have any last or final thoughts?
We're super passionate about helping in the space. You see our emails out there. Don't hesitate to send us an email, a note, question, thought. Love to hear from you. And we'll follow up with all the materials and maybe some of the questions. If we didn't get those, we'll get those answered. So thank you for everyone's time today.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
All right. Thank you guys. Bye.